Thank you so much, Jenny, for the kind introduction. I'm here with Audrey O, who is a distinguished art collector, co-founder of TRLab. Audrey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Audrey, can you tell us a little about TRLab before we get started talking about patronage?
For sure. I'm the co-founder and CEO of TRLab. We're an art and tech startup, and we were co-founded in 2021. My family had founded an art museum in Shanghai called Rockbun Art Museum in 2010. And so my path to collecting digital art and to NFT was actually very much so through the lens of the quote-unquote traditional art world. And when we first founded TRLab, the idea was there was quite a lot of distance between traditional art collectors and this new generation of collectors that are coming in. And so what are going to be the ways to accommodate more conversation and dialogue? Over the years, this mission has definitely shifted, but I think what has always stayed at the core of everything that we do is in thinking about how to make art more accessible and in thinking about how to help artists use technology to create more innovative and engaging experiences with education at its center. So when we started out, the first artist that we worked with was Cai Guoqiang, who is one of my personal favorite artists and also very important artist for both contemporary Chinese culture, but also is currently based in the U.S. And that vision then evolved to us working with the Calder Foundation, the Chris Burden Estate, Rhizome. Most recently, we just launched an online game with the Metropolitan Museum of Art earlier this year called Art Links. So as a startup, our vision has constantly shifted across time, and obviously there's quite a lot that's happened in the space as well over the last couple of years. So I'm very excited to discuss with you.
Thank you so much for that. There's so much to unpack here, so I'm really excited to get started. I think a really good point is just to set a little bit of background about what was your experience growing up in a family or well-known collectors, and I'm sure you've been inspired by your family and have built your own collection. Could you tell us a little about that?
Sure. I think I feel very lucky and privileged to have grown up in a family where art collecting was introduced to me at such a young age, where it was never seen as a foreign item. And my mom really took me to different cities to look at great art exhibitions, visit artist studios, and so I grew up able to understand the creativity of artists, because I think art is such a special thing where we live in a society where we're taught to be very productive, where everything that you do is supposed to have a exact result, and you should have this goal of this result before you even start. But art and working with artists is a whole other manner, because they're really utilizing their creativity, and sometimes there is no right answer. The artwork itself is what they find on their journey. And I remember one of the first exhibitions that really stood out in my mind was actually seeing a Calder exhibition in Switzerland. This was maybe 10, 15 years ago, and looking at the mobiles and how they were filling the space and just feeling such a deep connection to the works that it's indescribable and not really able to be captured by language. And I thought, wow. And I think that sense of wow is what has enabled me to start thinking about collecting my own art, and actually is what brought me to the digital world as well. But one of the things I learned as I went to college and as I met other people my age, I realized I'm one of the few where I got to grow up with this tradition, where I got to have art as part of my lives. For a lot of people, art actually feels very foreign. They, maybe go to a museum twice a year. They go see some blockbuster shows. But more and more so, I think younger people are not thinking about collecting art and the patronage of arts. They think about consumption. They think about YouTube and all this other content and media is out there, and art is lumped in as something that's somehow become more niche, where you have to be more in the know to become an art collector or an art patron. And that's also why I think digital art and the community that we're part of is extremely important because it's really redefining a new way for younger people to start joining in. And that's a movement that I would love to play a part of.
So there's so many things that you said that really hit home for me. So I completely agree with you that art has increasingly become something that young people feel like, oh, but that's very, I think they think of something highbrow in a way that they don't associate with. Whereas art, like you said, is not approached with performance in mind. It's something that just resonates. And what you said about how watching how artists work, their process, and I wonder if there's something similar into how like you started your art journey with the Calder pieces that you're saying, that it wasn't about there's some kind of end goal of I'm going to collect, I'm going to buy this thing, or like it wasn't about that. It spoke to you. And is that the kind of experience that you try to facilitate or recreate for other people?
Well, I think that's what TRLab hopes to do. One of the things I was most excited about in thinking about this new space is in the art world, there are quite a lot of gatekeepers, but I think they're also there for a reason. They want to make sure that an artist and their works and in their earlier career, especially, are protected. So what that means is, if you're walking into an art gallery and say it's an artist that has started to build a following of their own, it's quite hard for for just a stranger who the gallery doesn't know to be able to purchase the piece, because they want to know that you're going to collect it, you're going to treat it well, that you're not going to immediately, let's say, try to sell it or flip it, and that you are doing it in service of the artwork and the artist because you genuinely have some sort of connection to the work, even if it's related to investment, where ideally it's a more longer term horizon rather than I'm going to buy this today and sell it tomorrow. And I thought that it would be interesting to explore how within the digital medium, the idea is that anyone should be able to and can access artworks. Anyone should be able to purchase artworks. But then how can you set up processes in which you make sure that the people that are more serious or bigger fans of the artist that should be rewarded, and to people who have been engaging throughout the experiences can almost prove themselves to be worthy of purchasing the artworks. So throughout all of our experiences, you've always seen why I say education is always one of our main pillars, is going back to what we did with Thai, for example. It was actually a digital firework packet. So Thai is really well known for his grand firework explosions. His medium is gunpowder. And when we first started talking to him, he shared that one of his biggest regrets has been that no one has been able to join him in this co-creation of his work, because frankly, it's too dangerous. You cannot just give people a packet of gunpowder and say, come do what you want. And there are a lot of safety regulations, weather considerations, and all these other quite complicated procedures to do with it. And so we thought, hey, can we utilize NFT technology and this new world to make Thai's art more accessible as a co-creator and a collector? So as a collector, you would actually purchase a digital firework packet. There's a Thai's A to Z almanac of secret dates that matter to Thai, of how weather and safety regulations can affect his artworks in the real world. And then there was a Thailander that ran over 45 days, where every 12 hour was a new day. And as a collector, depending on when you set off your digital firework packet, you would actually determine the destiny of your artwork. And the collector's decisions also determine the makeup of the overall collection, because obviously there were some days where, let's say, like Thai's exhibition opening date at the Guggenheim, that became a very popular date because it was a special firework. But because so many people decided to set off their digital packets on that day, it actually became quantitatively less rare than some of the other normal days. But this started out a whole conversation with Thai and his collectors, and thinking about fan art and thinking about how can I give access to fans of my work that have never been able to afford my work or never been able to collect my work. And the way that we the way that we had made it is that we also had this quiz at the start where you collectors would be able to access a golden ticket. We had launched this quiz without any explanation of what the quiz was about, but it was a couple questions about Ty's life and a couple questions about Ty's medium. And if you got all these questions right, you received a golden ticket that actually gave you early access to being able to purchase the digital fireworks. And what we found that I think there were around 4,000 people who just decided to do the quiz even though they didn't know what would come of it. And I believe 80% of them actually ended up purchasing a firework packet. And so what we saw is this really interesting way in which NFTs can enable Ty's work to be interacted with in a different way than it has been in the physical world that we live in. But it can also provide proof of education, proof of someone that who's actually engaging with the work and who is quote unquote worthy to purchase the work, who will treat it with good intentions, rather than it needing to go through a more traditional gallery model where it's like, okay, like maybe you have an institution, maybe you have a certain collection or a certain representation that you've built up, and that is usually used as proof as to why and how you'd be able to access certain works.
4,000 people is a lot, and 80%, I think that's like some of them buying it, I think is like a complete outlier in this type of sale. So how did you bring these 4,000 people to begin with?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Fair enough.
We had just started this. We knew that Ty had influence, and within the, I'm friends with quite a lot of the younger Chinese collectors now, and I knew that they were all huge fans of Ty, but it was completely out of control. We had thought, maybe like 100 people would go through this exercise because we had not explained what this would give to the project. But when we announced it, I guess someone had posted about it on WeChat and someone had posted about it on Twitter, and it just randomly took off, and all of a sudden we were receiving submissions to enable people to get this golden ticket, even though they had no idea what this golden ticket was going to do. Granted, this was a very different time. This was early 2022, where I do think that there was a lot less fear towards entering the NFT market. Whereas I do think now when I talk to friends who haven't purchased an NFT yet, I feel like the learning curve has become much more difficult because NFTs have become really associated with financialization, really associated with a lot of other subjects within crypto and within securities that I feel like wasn't the case back then. So I think it's good timing, and we got really lucky. But I think also people are genuinely interested in learning more about Ty.
So, really random fact for me, Saiko Chang was actually the very first contemporary artist who really made me feel like I love contemporary art. And I was 19 years old. I was just starting college at a very rural part of Massachusetts, and they had these huge, large-scale installation of his work. And when I look back at it, I felt like part of what made his work so exciting to me was actually the use of fireworks, but I viewed it as technology that was so specialist, being used in such a unique way. He had these works that were showing, there was a series that he was showing explosions of a car and using light, different colored light to show how, what that burst looks like. Really. And so that one actually didn't have fireworks, but it was still looking at explosion, right? And I think that when I think about digital art, I think so many people find it compelling, like the discussion that we're having about video, AI, seeing how these tools are being used, I think people just find it fascinating, and it's so creative to see how they use it. And so with that, I actually want to ask you, I think that there's co-creation in this process that you're talking about, not just with the collectors, people who are buying and interacting in this way, but there's obviously a co-creation with your team of how to create this experience. And like, what does that look like? Because I know that you are very you're very specific in making sure that you're not just putting something that's non-digital, like just in a digital format, right?
That's actually something that I care a lot about. I know there are other platforms where they're potentially more focused on uh, adding an NFT element to an existing physical work and then putting it onto blockchain. So the NFT more so acts as a certificate or proof of authentication. And I was never that interested in. I was more interested in what you said, in co-creation, in working with artists who may not be so native to the medium, and in thinking about what are things that we can do. The reason why we focus on this is maybe partially because these are the artists that I grew up as fans of and where I feel extremely privileged to be able to work with them. And the second is that I think for a lot of digital artists, they're one, younger, they're two, they're much more creative and adaptable, and I don't feel like they need our help as much in rethinking about how to interact with this audience. I feel, in fact, I took a lot of inspiration from artists that I've met within this digital sphere in what they've done, in how they have utilized the technology in different ways, and in thinking about how to combine that with particular art forms. This became a particular challenge when we're working with dead artists. Because what does that mean, right? When you're working with, should I say, deceased artists, in creating new works. And so for us in working with Calder and Burden, it was really going from scratch, thinking a lot about what it meant for them to enter into the space, what was the legacy that they were trying to leave behind, what's the goal. Most usually it's to do with engaging a younger audience who may not be as familiar with their works. And so with Calder, it really was, I remember one time we visited the foundation and we just had this huge whiteboard brainstorming session. Sandy Rower, who's the grandson of Calder and now the president of the foundation, is a huge skeptic of NFTs, partially because he had previously been pitched to do a Calder coin, and which he had rightfully said no to. And so when we had first approached him, it was actually in Miami in 2021 with Hans Ulrich. And Hans Ulrich had said, look, Sandy, I really think that you need to think about the space seriously, but I do think that you need to enter the space in a particular manner. It's not going to be just about taking a video of a Calder sculpture that moves and putting it onto blockchain and say, hey, this is some new NFT that you can buy. And so from the get-go, the Calder Foundation was actually very insistent on finding a digital artist to partner with in rethinking what it's like to interact with the Calder work in the digital space. So there were a lot of other stories like that where I don't think we went to the foundations with, hey, this is the answer in the beginning. It was very much a collaborative process of what do you want to focus on? What are things that matter to you? What are aspects of your works that you feel like have been potentially disregarded in the past that can now be highlighted? And also, what are the amazing things that we're seeing that artists are doing in this space, and how can you get inspired to ultimately find a common ground?
So you mentioned how the timing was quite right for the Taigoqiang project to launch. And I think that during that timing, there were also a lot of NFT speculators. And obviously, you were creating something that was supposed to be so much more meaningful and avoid speculation. And from the perspective of patronage, what do you do about these determinants of values? Like, there's monetary, there's cultural, there's aesthetic. There are these different elements that are happening, and you are both a patron, but you're also someone who is shifting what it means to be a patron. And
that's something I think about a lot right now, especially because we've been building a young patron council group for my family's museum in China, and China is not a place that historically has had patronage, and also there's no tax incentives, and so people have never really supported nonprofits or museums in this way before. But going back to your first point, I think speculation plays a part in everything, and in traditional art too, I think there's a ton of speculation. It's just not as obvious as the NFTs because the numbers are more obviously out there where anyone can look up what the level of speculation has been like. But I don't think it's necessarily healthy to fully avoid speculation or the market. I think what we have tried to do as much as we can is to add in these educational elements where you need to go through these processes to have early access, or you need to, for Calder, you had to go through this really esoteric 45-minute quiz to even be able to get access to the works. And it included an essay question that was graded by the foundation. So there are a lot of random things that I think we added in and experimented with as we thought about how to, it's not necessary to keep out speculators, but how to protect fans and art enthusiasts who are actually interested in the work and who may not have access to bots, who may not have access to...
You made proof of work necessary.
Yeah, it's like proof of participation, I think, is a main thing. But I think in many ways the problems that we're facing around speculation is we're not alone in the digital world. I think it's really happening all across all different asset types, including art as an asset type in general. But it's just not as obvious, and so it's harder to make headlines out of it because a lot of the dealing is done behind the scenes.
I mean, I think that it's not like you said, speculation itself is not bad, right? Because all of us are thinking, I want to support this artist. I want to see how well they do as well, right? And with that, I think another part of digital art that's quite special is that, like you said, it does democratize access. And what would you say is, and you have mentioned how there's some parts of working in NFTs that's quite difficult for people. So but what do you think is still so special about this as a format of collecting and patronizing?
I think what I love the most, which I feel like people have not talked about as much in the past years, is the element of discovery. I think we live in an age where people have started to really discover artists on Instagram and social media. And when I talk to my younger friends who collect, it's not usually, hey, a gallery told me about so-and-so artist, or I saw them in X museum. It's more so, hey, I saw this work on Instagram. I really related to it. Started following the artist. I went to see their show, and I ended up purchasing one of their works. And I think the digital world, it allows for us to take this to a whole other spectrum in a really special way. And so one of the first experiences I had when I first started collecting NFTs, I had placed a bid on a artwork that had already been collected by an artist named Amrit Paul Singh. He had created these series of toy rooms that I thought was quite interesting, taking from different movie scenes, including Interstellar, which is one of my favorite movies. And I was playing around. I was like, oh, I'm really interested in this. I placed a bid on it, but I didn't expect to hear anything from it. Next thing I know, maybe a few days after that, I received a DM on Twitter from another artist that I'd been speaking to. And he said, look, like, Amrit saw that your wallet address had placed a bid on this work of his, and he saw that in your same wallet that you had collected one of my pieces. So he was wondering if you'd be open to chatting with him. And I thought that was so fascinating because he didn't know anything about who I am, but he knew everything about what I collected. Mm-hmm. And you never really have that in the physical world, right? It's always you're meeting a person and then you're saying, oh, they're so-and-so, and then you're associating, where their collection ends up being one of these private parts that you actually don't know that much about. But in this world, it was the other way around, where Amrit had no idea who I was, my gender, my name, my age, anything, but he could see that I had collected these other works in my wallet. And then he could reach out to an artist who he thought maybe I would have some connection to. And we ended up talking, and the PFP that I use today, which is a toy face that Amrit had made for me of Audrey Hepburn, who I was named after, came from this very organic discovery conversation. And I just don't think that can be replicated in any way throughout the Instagram discovery process, because you're always going from a profile where you're tied to your online persona and identity versus a profile where someone can know nothing about you, but it's entirely about what you collected.
I'm gonna ask a lighter question. If somebody were to look at your wallet, what would they say about your collection? How would they describe it?
I think they would think it's a little all over the place. and it's partially because I think I'm growing and learning through. Similar to my own collection out of the digital art world, I think there are works that I related to at a point in time that were really important to me, and I can see how my collection has begun to shift over time. In the past year or so, I've been really starting to think more about the narrative and the thesis of my collection. But when I first started collecting, it was more based on works that I found interesting, artists that I really enjoyed conversations with, how I felt like I could relate to their philosophy. Now I think I'm trying to be a lot more particular about what I collect, why I collect, and how it fits into my collection. But it's really a learning journey. And so I'm trying to learn from other much more experienced collectors who I've been fortunate to know, including Monique, who is sitting here with us today. She has one of the most amazing collections, and it's very deeply researched. I think I'm very far from there, and I think that there is a lot of fun in collecting based on instinct at times, but I'm trying to be a bit more serious with how I approach my own collection, partially also inspired by how my mom thinks about her collection now.
Could you speak more to that in terms of, you talked about the refinement that is happening that's different from your early ways of collecting, and this comparison to your mother's collection?
Oh, I actually have a very different problem than most people I know in considering my mom's collection because we have such similar taste. We like the exact same artist. When I discover a new artist, I think, oh, like I want to introduce him or her to you. She'll usually say, I have actually collected this work already, a work from a similar series. And so there's been times where I've found a work, I've purchased it, I've gone to my mom, and I found out that she had a very similar work from a similar series of the same artist. And so I think for me, I talked to a lot of my friends, and for them, it's about how to be in dialogue with their parents who collect and helping their parents understand what they want to collect. For me, it's more been about thinking about differentiation. Like how am I thinking about collecting in different ways that my mom has? I think digital works is definitely one aspect that I feel much more passionate about than my mom. But I'm also really interested in thinking about works related to language, partially because I grew up in Hong Kong and I only went to the US for college. And Chinese is still my first language. So thinking about jumping back between the different languages and how the world relates to each other is something that I've started building out more within my collection. But I don't feel like my experience is necessarily similar to many other people that I've talked about whose parents collect.
I feel like when it comes to discovery, there's the element of just finding an artist, art that you really love, and there's that joy there. And then there's also a little bit of like a bragging right to be the person to show other people, be like, look what I found, you know? And it's amazing, and to be a tastemaker in that way. Do you feel that that's something that you get to share with people who you maybe don't even necessarily know, have a personal relationship with, and like you can look at their collection that way, kind of earlier, like what you're talking about, and you feel like this person is so cool, not only because you guys share similar artists, but because they also are introducing you to different artists?
Yes, definitely collection visits are my favorite things to do because you understand so much about a collector and their journey and what matters to them through what they collect. I was fortunate enough to visit Alan Lau, who's the president of Animoca's collection. Sorry, it's been a long week. 2 days ago, I believe. And it was so interesting to see how different narratives fit into his collection. He described his collection actually as a set of mahjong pieces, where there's not necessarily one thread of thought that he's following, but different things that are coming together in a collection that ultimately makes sense to him. And so I feel that there's nothing else that can replicate that type of collection visits, especially for digital art. I actually think that's where collection visits is most important, because there are collectors that are really thinking about new ways to showcase digital art. I don't think there has been the right standard that's been set in the right technology, the right hardware in showing digital art in fully the right way. And so you start to see a lot of creative solutions, some maybe not artist approved, and people who want to show off their collection, who want to share their collection with people that are visiting their homes. And so I also really, really do enjoy visiting a home of a digital collector, because you see how they're trying to utilize like projectors and different elements and bringing digital art into their physical homes.
How do you share your collection?
I actually am really private with my collection. I've been approached before to do some collection pieces of people coming to visit my home, but I feel quite private about it. I think partially because I think I'm still very young, where even when I look back at to what I collected a few years ago, I have questions about the decision making that I have them, and I feel like it will always be an iterative process for me, and until I feel like I'm more mature and more confident in how my collection is telling a story, I don't think it'll be something I share quite publicly.
Do you think that's really interesting? Because I feel like that itself is telling a story about who you are. But I understand that you're quite, you started collecting very young, and maybe that feels a bit more private. I actually wanted to ask you a bit about this idea of patronage. There are different types of patronage, right? Patronage isn't always about buying something. And what would you say, what opportunities exist in a digital art space for that?
I think the patronage within digital art still has a lot to be developed at the moment. There are a couple museums, including Whitney and LACMA, that have started digital councils, where I do feel like it's a nice platform for collectors to be able to interact more deeply with curators and thinking about what will go into the acquisitions of a museum. I think we heard a little bit earlier, it is still quite a difficult process, partially just because timelines within the institution world is so built ahead of time that it's difficult for institutions, even Rockbund, which is quite a small institution, to be able to move freely and nimbly. Like right now, I believe our exhibition programming is complete for 2027. And so when you're thinking about how to bring new items in, we're not a collecting institution either. We're more of a console, and we commission works from artists and we show them. And we try to do typically the first institution show of artists in Asia. But even then, when I think about there's so much technology development of technology happening so quickly, it's very difficult for institutions to be able to react in a way that is fast enough for collectors and artists and people within our community. But then I also understand it from an institutional point of view, because they've been working in this timeline for so long that artists are getting snagged for 2027, for 2028. So it's very difficult for them to not be in that same timeline and to be the first institution that tries to move at a faster space.
I know that we're wrapping things up, and I know that we wanted to talk about some new things that are happening at TRLab. And you've mentioned, actually in the very beginning, that you guys are trying many different things, and it's a learning process. Could you share a little bit more about what's going on that's new?
Absolutely. We just launched a game, an online game with the Metropolitan Museum of Art earlier this year. I would love for everyone to experience it and play it. It's called Art Links. It's a blockchain-based game. It's the Met's first ever blockchain initiative, and it's a short session online game where you're asked, you can kind of see on the right here, you're asked to find different connections between the artworks from the Met's collection. For us, we also saw Art Links as a different way for people to start engaging with art and NFTs. The way that NFTs would play a part in this game is if you went through the game and if you're able to complete everything successfully, there are certain badges that you can get that are completely free, that are NFTs. And if you have a good amount of badges, it qualifies you for potential rewards at the Met, including a private tour with a curator. So we thought about rewards that are not typically accessed by the general audience, and how can we link that with people who are engaging with and interacting with the Met in a new way. The target audience we thought for the game would be people who have, maybe visited the Met 2 to 3 times a year before. They're tech enthusiasts. They may be already familiar with the blockchain, but they're not particularly interested in deepening their engagement with an art institution. And so we almost want Art Links to serve as an opening where, hey, it's actually, you don't know art history degrees required for this game. If you just read through the labels carefully, it's a little bit of a brain teaser, but you should be able to get through the game in around 15 to 20 minutes. And we did a ton of testing where we wanted to make sure that it was a right amount of difficulty for people, but you really don't need to have any other art history lessons related to this. And more than 30,000 people have been playing the game, which has been incredibly exciting. And we found that people are coming back and telling us, like, oh, this is a really new, interesting way to think about engaging with art, engaging with a collection that is partially experimental, where we're really taking a lot of inspiration from online games, like the New York Times with Connections and with Wordle, but applying that to art history and the Met's collection. The game will be updating with new content every week until middle of April. It's just artlinks.metmuseum.org. You don't need to download any app for it. I would really appreciate it if people played it, because we're also looking for different types of feedback.
Is there anything that you wanted to mention about developments in China, or that's new, or?
Oh yeah, I can share a little bit. We are planning a couple really exciting initiatives in mainland China later this year that will have digital technology play a part, but it's really in thinking about the relationship between art and retail experiences in a new way. So I'm excited to bring that to life.
It sounds really exciting. Thank you so much, Audrey. We could take a few questions if you guys have any in the audience. Audrey covered everything that could be possible. Okay, well then, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tech is not with us today. Thank you very much for joining us today. And
I think should be working.
wonderful. Thank you for that wonderful session, Audrey and Hannah. Actually, I have a question, if I may. How do you go about funding digital artworks? What about the relationship between, because patronage also involves realizing large-scale, ambitious projects that sometimes go beyond a museum's budget or beyond an artist's vision. And certainly we heard from Liu Yang and John Raffman earlier, and there I know that just the programming, the number of people involved in realizing kind of these gamified artworks is enormous. So is that something that you're also looking at, or the Rock Bund has a certain approach to it? Can you comment on that, please?
So Exdru Noel, who is our director now at the Rockman Art Museum, came over from Guggenheim in New York, and we've really been under their leadership. I'm learning so much from them every day, and I know that they've started thinking a lot about what it means to work with artists, where we worked with Wang Shui, was it last year, 2 years ago, where AI was utilized as an element within their works. Ryndon Johnson, who's an artist that we just worked with, who also whose actually exhibition will still be on until April 6th, is also really thinking about AI and how it plays a part within his works. But I think it's really an open conversation to be had. I don't think the right answer has been defined yet. But the most important thing that needs to happen first is I think more and more people need to start collecting digital art and to start seeing themselves as patrons for them to then start helping artists with more ambitious projects. I think this is a problem that all artists face because artists should operate in a world without limits, but then they're often then set with financial limits, physical limits, and everything else that goes on with the execution of a project. When we worked with the Chris Burden estate, for example, we focused on Burden's unrealized works that Burden had actually already realized in his mind, but a lot of them, they were just not physically possible or financially possible to do so. So I think this will always be a point of contention between artists who have amazing visions, who have so many ideas that they want to put into reality, and finding the right people who are the right sponsors for the work. I think it really takes everyone coming together to answer it rather than one or two institutions taking a stance. And I similarly feel that why I'm interested in doing these projects with the Met and why I'm so grateful that the Met was trusting in working with TRLab to put this to life is I think less people are collecting art these days. And so how do you get people from not caring at all about art to becoming art enthusiasts and then to becoming collectors and patrons? It's a long journey, but it's a funnel that needs to be opened at the top.
Thank you so much for that interesting insight. I actually have a follow-up question, if I may, which is about conservation. Because I think one of the issues that we face with digital artworks is that technology determines somehow their lifespan, right? And we have people like Rhizome working to conserve early net art. We have transfer to video. Is this something that you're also kind of talking to museums about, how to create these very stable environments or how to preserve the longevity? I mean, we heard from Sunny Chung earlier, right, where he was saying, a conservator will first of all be asked, you need to make this artwork last forever. So how does one do that in the digital space?
So I'm by no means an expert in conservation, but we did have to deal with it because one of our artworks with within the Chris Burden collaboration was collected by LACMA. And so we had gone through the whole process of, I believe it was like a 15-page Word document. We had to fill out like how exactly we envision for this NFT to be shown, what are the specs, and a lot of questions that he think, and it wasn't even a complicated NFT artwork, it was a video work. And so I think I've been speaking with curators and conservators, but I think that there potentially needs to be a new generation of conservators that come out that are not trained in how institutions have thought conservation should be in the past, because technology is just moving so quickly. And if you're really focused on preserving one moment, one artifact in a particular amount of time, it's very difficult to think about what the future could look like. I don't have a right answer here, but I have seen the complexities and the difficulties in having an institution acquire and work.
Thank you so, so much for those insights, Audrey, and thank you for the moderation, Hannah. Now, we're going to break for lunch, for a collector's lunch, so please do join us. First of all, give our panelists a big hand, of course.